Oftentimes we're reaching out, we're prospecting, we're telling customers something they don't know about us. Did you know that we're the market leader in this? Did you know that we have a product that does that? And we're not speaking the customer's language because the customers spend like a fraction of a percent of the time giving a shit about what it is that we do, pardon the color. They have their own problems, right? And so if we can just learn to speak the language of the customers, don't talk about our products, just talk about their problems, and not just talk about their problems, deepen their awareness of their problems, why they exist, why they're so hard to solve. Because even if I manage to talk about a problem, you're like, oh yeah, I know I have that problem. Your tendency is going to be to think that you could solve that problem on your own. So I don't just have to say on the product, but like why it's so hard to solve. So that's where I recommend a lot of people just start.
Hello and welcome to Tuesdays with Morrisey, where we share insights from great thinkers. Today I'm excited to be joined by David Priemer, founder of Cerebral Selling and the author of the books Sell the Way You Buy and The Sales Leader They Need. David, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Adam. Yeah, great to be with you.
Believe it or not, you were one of the first sales thought leaders when I got into sales, directly into a leadership role a few years ago. I spent about 10 years in management consulting and an investment firm until I joined a startup as the go-to-market leader. And I was following you by recommendation of a friend, was reading a lot of Sandler, particularly listening to the audiobook, The Essential Sales Library, and reading The Challenger Sale. I've been getting your insights at 5:44 a.m. Central in my inbox every Tuesday ever since. And one of the first videos I saw of you was on LinkedIn, and I thought it was brilliant. I was also wondering, what is this guy doing in front of Lake Louise? But you gave an illustrative example of a customer being asked a leading question. Sir, do you like to save money while you shop?
That's right.
I'm curious, what do we need to know about these leading questions and what should people be doing instead?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, leading questions are the worst because, and by the way, just to define for your listeners, like a leading question is a question you ask that has obviously one right answer that you you want your customers or the person you're asking to answer as. So the setup I said, I was walking through, this is when we were expecting our first kid. This is many years ago. And I was walking through a trade show for expectant parents, where they sell baby toys and cribs and insurance and all these things. And the fella says, "Excuse me, sir, can I ask you one question?" I was like, no, I don't like talking to salespeople, right? And he's like, "No, it's just one quick question." He said, I'm like, "Okay, fine." He says, "Do you like to save money when you shop?" Now, it's a horrible question that makes your skin crawl because on one hand, you're like, if I say no, then I'm an idiot because who doesn't like to save money when they shop? But if I say yes, then I'm kind of giving you consent to do all your sleazy sales things to me. And so in sales, like oftentimes salespeople ask these leading questions, sometimes intentionally, and sometimes just because it's part of our repertoire that we've been put up to. But a leading question would be like, "So hey, Adam, I know you have this podcast, and I'm sure you're trying your best to deliver great value to your audience. Let me ask you, like on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is like I want to have the best podcast in the world and deliver tons of value to my audience, and 1 is like I don't give a crap about this podcast and I'm just here just to get my voice on the air. Like where would you say you are?" Like that's a leading question, and so we laugh, but we often ask our customers these kinds of leading questions all the time. Like, how important to you is it for your sales team to be number 1, top of the leaderboard? How important is growing your revenue to your business? Is it important? So it's horrible. So your second part of the question was, how do we make that better, right? And so there's a couple things. Number 1 is just take a step back and stop asking those stupid questions about, is this thing important to you? It obviously is. And ask more open-ended questions. But if you like to ask questions where you're asking the customer to weigh in on the level of importance or feeling around something, my advice would be to shift the focus from importance to priority. So for example, I might say, hey, Adam, I'm sure that you want to have a really great podcast, but I'm sure you also have other things that you have a day job, you have other things you're focused on. I'm curious, when it comes to investing in your podcast, like where would you say that is on the priority scale? Like 10 being, oh my gosh, the podcast is the thing that's going to blow my whole career open, so I got to put all my energy into that. And one being, hey, look, I love this podcast gig, but I got other stuff that I'm focused on. Like, so you see what I'm asking about, I understand it's important, but I'm shifting the question to priority. So if I even said like, how important, like when you go out to shop, is saving money like the number one factor that you think of when you make a purchase, or is it something else? That's a much more fair, open-ended way of asking.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't put the partner as much in the defensive. And we'll talk a little bit about your methodology around selling, the way you buy. Before we do that, I mean, you definitely have an interesting inroads to sales. You studied chemistry and atmospheric science before going on to lead sales teams as companies as big as Salesforce for nearly 20 years. How did somebody studying atmospheric science get into sales?
Like everyone else, by accident.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it gave you you have maybe the best excuse of all to say, well, I'm not a salesman.
No, well, like no one like really, and I talk about this in Sell the Way You Buy. Out of all the business programs that exist at American universities, I think, like say for example, back when I was doing the research, if memory serves, let's call it 4,500 colleges and universities have business programs. Only about 150 had anything to do with selling, and yet it's still the number one thing as a business person, as an entrepreneur. If you can't sell, you have nothing. And yet we don't teach it. And so when you grow up and you go into school, no one tells, your guidance counselor doesn't tell you this is a thing that you can do, right? Even though it's also like the number one job in America. Is it 1 in 9, 1 in 11 people, whatever the stat is, like are in some kind of official sales motion, right? And so I was no different. I was a research scientist, and I ended up joining a startup at the turn of the dot-com boom. So around 1999, 2000, I was wrapping up my research, and I said, you know what? Like I don't want to be a research scientist anymore. And at the time, they had some ex-engineers, which is what I was in. They came back to the university to give talks. They had worked at Accenture, which at the time was called Anderson Consulting, or McKinsey. And I was like, oh, this sounds really cool, like getting into business from science and engineering. And so I started to kind of go down that route. And at the time, everyone was joining startups. And so I ended up joining a startup as a sales engineer. So shout out to all the sales engineers, SCs out there. I was, familiar with, I did a lot of coding, as a research scientist, and I was good at presenting. So I did a lot of like custom coding and demos, and it was an enterprise software company. And I just fell in love with sales because to me, it was like an engineering problem. It's like all these variables. And when I say it like this, people get it. But when I say it like this, they don't get it. And so I became very curious about it. And my curiosity kind of landed me in this role of sales. But, the secret is, while I love sales, I don't like talking to salespeople, just like everyone else doesn't like talking to salespeople, which is kind of where like the bit of the empathetic approach of Sell the Way You Buy came from. But yeah, that's how I got into sales, by accident.
Yeah, it's. I mean, in many regards, it is both. I was talking to Chris Orlob a couple weeks ago. We were talking about the fact that it's an art and a science. But I remember when I was first, getting into, and I had been selling things informally, but selling solutions full time. One of my sales mentors was at Salesforce, and now he's at a customer success company. But I would tell him all the things I was doing. He's like, at the end of the day, it's still trial and error. So I don't think scientists get enough credit for their business acumen when it comes to, because basically all we're doing is we're evaluating information, making a hypothesis, testing it in the market, and then getting feedback and then adjusting. Exactly what a scientist does with a test.
Well, it's the adjusting thing. So you're familiar with Mark Roberge. Mark Roberge is a great guy. He was the first VP of sales and CRO of HubSpot. He is now a VC and teaches sales at Harvard. He was super brilliant guy and very generous with his time while he was building HubSpot. And we were building our third startup that ended up being acquired by Salesforce, which is how I got to work there. And so he did a really great job of encapsulating a lot of his wisdom into his book called The Sales Acceleration Formula. And you talk about really smart people. One of the questions that sales leaders have when they're building a business is, who should I hire? And what should I even look for in reps, right? Because everyone has their biases and predispositions. So at HubSpot, what they did was they said, hey, look, they were a bunch of like MIT engineers, like really smart. So they said, we're going to interview reps, potential reps, and we're going to grade them against these like 50 different dimensions of competency. And then we're going to hire them based on our intuition. And we're going to do a regression analysis against their performance on the dashboard and see like which character traits in the interview process correlated the most to, sales success. And so he says in his book, he's like, here are the 8 that correlated the most. But he also says, don't do what we did, because your business is different than our business. And the analysis that we did was only valid for like 9 months, and then the nature of our business changed. So I say the same thing, it's important to be mindful of like the art and science of selling, but keep in mind, like the system that you're operating in is also, unlike many scientific systems, is changing all the time. Mm-hmm. So selling now is different than selling in the middle of the pandemic or pre-pandemic. And yet salespeople tend to fall in love with their own tactics and they don't change. So this is like this, you have to change and not fall in love and always be asking why and course correcting. Otherwise, you're going to fail.
It reminds me of a lot of the great writers in the 18th and 19th century and potentially earlier. The first things when they were students they would learn to do is translate. They would translate the great works. And it reminds me similar to that. It's like you have to know the rules and the tactics and the challenger and the sandler, and then you got to throw them out the window to some extent, use the embodied knowledge and make the right decisions.
100%. Well, I'll tell you a story. Like literally yesterday, I was training the team over at DocuSign. So I'm in the room and I'm talking to some of the reps at DocuSign. And I asked them, I said, since we met last time, I'm a big fan of the one thing. So I'm like, so what's one thing that you did differently? And one of the reps was telling me, she said, well, I got on site with a customer, and which I don't always do, but I went on site. And before I did a little bit of research, and she's telling me I did a little bit of research on their website and I found this, and then I reached out and I got them enticed into like a meeting and yada, yada, yada. I'm like, this is great. I'm like, do you know why what you just did worked so well? And the idea is a lot of us, we don't know why. Like, I just know that I did it and like it produced this outcome, but I don't understand fundamentally why that tactic worked or it didn't. So I'm a big fan of Dan Pink, and I'm a big fan of, his book To Sell Is Human. And I love this idea. He says, sales is a thinking person's profession. I could argue it always was, but I could also argue that, maybe in the day people tolerated poor sales behavior, but nowadays where people have access to tons of information and they feel they don't need you, their tolerance for poor bad behaviors is much less. And so, I say, like, unless when you execute a tactic, you understand why that tactic worked. Like, what was the psychology that it was based on? What was the science it was based on? There is an art 100% to like how you execute it, the tone, the approach. But if you don't understand why DocuSign rep, what you did was so great, then you won't know how to repeat it per se. And you also won't have as much conviction around repeating it because you don't know. And it's when you understand it at the fundamental level that you're able to execute with more precision and conviction and course correct. And so I'm always a big fan of, like, if you want to be good at sales, you have to take it seriously and treat it like, anything else. Like so much of sales training I find is first aid. Someone's bleeding, do this. Whereas it should be medical school. Like you should be going to like the sales medical school to understand fundamentally how these systems work so that you can be more resilient in how you execute.
Yeah, those are some things that are kind of surprising. They're very obvious, but they happen all the time. What were some other things that surprised you about the way sales was done as you assimilated into the ranks of the salesman?
Yeah, well, so, first of all, if I were to kind of go back, it's not just knowing why the tactics work or why they don't. In Sell the Way You Buy, I start out the first chapter with a section called the Cobra Kai paradox. And if you know what I mean? If I say Cobra Kai, do you get the cultural reference?
I know what Cobra Kai is, but I don't know what you're going to say with the Cobra Kai paradox.
So I'm 49 years old. So when I was born in 1975. So when I was 9 in 1984, the movie The Karate Kid comes out. And, and nowadays it's on, there's a show called Cobra Kai and you kind of get it. And the idea, the wax on, wax off, right? And the idea is like, so you have this kid from New Jersey who moves to California and he gets bullied by a bunch of, California kids who go to this karate school called the Cobra Kai. And the Cobra Kai is run by this ex, Army Green Beret guy who's like very disciplined and no mercy kind of focused, like, a hard kind of guy. And he grooms students in his image. And so what I call like the Cobra Kai paradox in sales is like you have these kids that go out there who learn from a jerk, right? And they grow up to be jerks. But I believe, and this is kind of where I talk about this in relation to the movies, that these aren't bad kids. They just pick the wrong sensei, right? And I believe that in sales it's the same thing. There are a lot of what you might call bad salespeople out there, and as a business owner and entrepreneur, I get prospected into all the time by these really bad salespeople. But I believe that these bad salespeople are not bad people. Like, they are good people that are going out and they're executing these horribly, crappy tactics, right, that don't work because someone told them that this is what they should do. I call these Cobra Kai tactics because they just picked the wrong sensei, and I also believe that sensei may not be a bad person, but they're just executing these tactics. So I would say, to your question, one of the biggest sins, again, that salespeople commit is they just do what they're told because some sensei, used these tactics 10 years ago and it worked. So like that's, I say, for salespeople to take a step back and take a look at the tactics that you're using and ask yourself, if you found yourself on the buying side, would you succumb to these would these tactics work on you? And if the answer is no, which is often the case, then go back to the drawing board and get better, do better. So that's what I mean by the Cobra Kai tactics. So when I came into the sales profession, I found there was a lot of Cobra Kai tactics.
I mean, yeah, we're coming out of almost that used car salesman stereotype. That still lingers in people's minds. What was the moment? Describe the moment where you put it together, the concept sell the way you buy.
Yeah. So, being at Salesforce, and I came over with the ship when they acquired my company, and I spent 5 awesome years there. I used to run small business sales for the Eastern US for Salesforce. And I love Salesforce. I love my Salesforce experience. Like, good kids, good reps. Like, they want to try really hard. And if you're in sales, Salesforce is great because it's like the Super Bowl of sales every month, a very sales-centric culture. But I found that, stepping into this very sales-centric culture, when I looked at the tactics that my team was running, I just had this revelation. Like, the things that they're doing, while not categorically ineffective nor unethical, are just things that like wouldn't work on me, again, when I was on the buying side. And the reason I knew this is because as a VP at Salesforce, people wanted to sell me stuff all the time. So they're prospecting into me, they're calling me, and I'm not answering the phone. And I'm not responding to LinkedIn emails and requests unless it was like an internal person that I knew who it was. And why? Because I don't like talking to salespeople. So I realized that like these tactics that like my reps are going out with, like something's got to change. Because like, again, they weren't categorically ineffective. But this is where I kind of had this epiphany where I'm like, okay, if this is the best sales organization in the world and we're executing these tactics, like we got to do better. And that's kind of where, I saw it. And again, I love Salesforce, but the cool thing is about working for a big company, which I never signed up for. I'm a startup guy, but like I love my time at Salesforce, is that you can see things at scale when you have thousands of sales reps that you can't see when you have like 50 or 100 sales reps. So that's kind of where I had this epiphany. So I started to write for the Salesforce blog, which they actually like because they like it when entrepreneurs come in from the outside. So they said, oh, hey, if you have stuff to share, thoughts, perspectives, like, here's our platform. So I started to write for the Salesforce blog, and some of the content ended up getting picked up by like Forbes and Entrepreneur. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. So I kept doing it. And that kind of strengthened my resolve to keep diving deeper into the, the art and science of modern selling.
The concept of sell the way you buy is so great. I mean, you mentioned it. It's like no one wants to get cold called. No one wants to get cold emailed. But the majority of times what happens is like, all right, we got this new thing. How do you guys want to sell it? Well, we got this big list. We should call them and email them. What is in your mind, the modern go-to-market playbook to meet customers where they're at?
Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the hardest questions, and I have lots of awesome clients, like big enterprise software companies, including Salesforce, and then, all the way down to smaller, organizations. the question I ask them is I say like, well, what problem do you solve for your customers? And a lot of times they can't answer that question. They know what products they have. They're really good with the products. A lot of enablement is focused on like, here's the product and here's what's new about it and here are the features and here's like even the benefits, right? But it's like, what problem does it solve that the customer actually cares about? So like I might work with a company who says, oh, hey, like we help customers solve the problem of systems that don't talk to each other. And I'm like, no one wakes up in the middle of the night. And I, by the way, I hate the question, what keeps you up at night? But no one wakes up in the middle of the night saying, oh my gosh, my systems don't talk to each other. I'm like, why does someone give a crap about the fact that their systems don't talk to each other? And we go through this exercise. And so kind of taking a step back, like that's the big challenge that a lot of organizations have is like they're too into their product that they don't really know like, well, what problem do you actually solve for your customer that they care about? And so the trick is, when you're reaching out, oftentimes we're reaching out, we're prospecting, we're telling customers something they don't know about us. Did you know that we're the market leader in this? Did you know that we have a product that does that? And like, we're not speaking the customer's language because the customers spend like a fraction of a percent of the time giving a shit about what it is that we do, pardon the color. They have their own problems, right? And so if we can just learn to speak the language of the customers, don't talk about our products, just talk about their problems, and not just talk about their problem, deepen their awareness of their problems, why they exist, why they're so hard to solve. Because even if I manage to talk about a problem, you're like, oh yeah, I know I have that problem. Your tendency is going to be to think that you can solve that problem on your own. So I don't just have to say on the product, but like why it's so hard to solve. So that's where I recommend a lot of people just start.
One of my favorite lines from you in regards to selling the way you buy is describe your customers' problems better than they can.
100%. Like, and the crystallization of the problem, is something, because again, a lot of people have problems, but they haven't been able to put their finger on. I sometimes refer to these as like the unknown, unspoken problems. To say like, what problem do you got going on there, Adam? And you're like, I don't know, like things are pretty good. I got my podcast, got my job. And we're like, but if I started to say, it's interesting, I talk with a lot of people who have podcasts and jobs, and one of the things they really struggle with is this. And you're like, oh yeah. I got that problem, right? Mm-hmm. Now we're having a conversation. So I say like crystallizing the problem in the mind of the customer in a way that's more clear than it already exists, or it's even like they haven't even been able to put two and two together, is powerful. You want me to give you an example?
Yeah, please.
So there's this concept I talk about in the book that I wrote a post in Harvard Business Review about 5 years ago now. And the Harvard Business Review post was called How Younger Salespeople Can Win Older Customers. And in it, I talk about this concept I call experience asymmetry. So what is this? When I was at Salesforce, I had a lot of young, enthusiastic sales reps. A lot of them had no shortage of effort and enthusiasm. They would pick up the phone, they would make calls, no problem. But a lot of them had tons of activity and no pipeline. So I'd be like, well, Adam, what's going on, man? Like there's no pipeline. I'm like, what's going on? And Adam would say, no, David, I don't know. I'm making the calls. I'm saying it like, you told us, we're reading the script and, focusing on A, B, and C. And so I would say, look, I have no recourse but to listen to your calls and just say, hey, look, is there something I can pick up on? And I would listen to these calls, these young, enthusiastic reps, and I would close my eyes and I would say, you know what? I don't even care about the words. I'm just like listening for whatever. And I would say, you know what you sound like? You sound like you're bothering this customer. Like you sound like one of my kids when they're about to hit me up for something they think I'm going to say no to already. That's the way you sound, right? And it's very off-putting to the customers. Like you lack confidence and conviction in your sales motion. So why would anyone believe the words that you're saying, even if the words are right? So I say this to say, when I work with my clients and they say, oh yeah, like we want to sell more stuff. I'm like, let me ask you, Adam, do you ever listen to your sales reps' phone calls? I said, and the reason I ask is because when I used to do this, and I still do now, even in my practice, I listen to my customers' calls. Like I hear this lack of, I go through the narrative, lack of confidence and conviction, and it's like very off-putting. And they're like, oh yes, we have what you said. We have that. Yeah. And I realized it wasn't just with young reps. It could be with like a new rep or, new to your industry or new to the company. And I'm like, I don't have the narrative down right. So I just struggle to manifest the confidence and conviction. I will tell you, in all my years of doing this, no client has ever come to me with that problem. That's a problem I bring to them. And when I bring it to them and I say, like, this is what I experience, this is what I see. Are you seeing this? And then they realize they have this problem. A, they can't unsee it. B, they must think that I can probably do an okay job of helping them solve this problem if it's something I see all the time. So, and by the way, like, how do I solve the problem? It doesn't matter how I solve the problem. Are you interested? Right? And so it's the same thing with your customers, whoever you're selling to. If you can describe the problem and like why it exists and why it's so hard to solve and the nuance behind it better than they can, even if it wasn't top of mind, you'll immediately be able to establish credibility, and they'll want to, I'm not saying buy, but they'll want to learn more. That's it.
Yeah, whenever I'm reenacting sales wins, I'll bring in a little bit from Tommy Boy.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, it went exactly like this. I asked them, hey, do you want to buy 100 licenses? And they said, actually, we've decided to go with you. And I'll say, well, I completely understand. Wait, you what? You do?
Yeah.
What are you coaching teams on right now in regards to just like getting in front of customers? Because that's the other thing too, is like we see like, oh, the activity's up, but the connections are so low because no one's picking up the phones and no one's reading their emails.
Yeah. Look, I think HubSpot had it right. It's funny. I find myself, I don't know if this is some kind of wisdom, I find myself quoting a lot lately, because a lot of reps and companies, they come to me and they say, hey, David, it's the end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year. We want to maximize the revenue and juice the numbers, right? Like, what can we do to get customers to sign like this month? What are some tactics that we can do, right? And I go back to this sage wisdom. I'm like, have you ever heard the statement or the question, when's the best time to plant a tree? You ever hear this?
Yeah.
When's the best time to plant a
20
tree?
years ago.
I love it. 20
20
years ago was the best time to plant a tree, right?
Second best day is today.
Today. Love it. You're wise, Adam. So it's the exact same thing. I'm like, yeah, is there stuff that we can do to like make customers close today or this week with some fancy discounting or pressure tactics? Like maybe. Like I'm not acting like that stuff doesn't work if you do it the right way. But like the best time to have teed that up was a quarter or two ago. And so I think HubSpot had it right, where like their strategy right off the bat as they grew the company was to create a massive amount of content. Because at the beginning of HubSpot, they were an inbound marketing software platform. And they only recently got into CRM and some of these other things. So if you Google anything in sales, like on the internet, a piece of content on HubSpot.com will pop up because they planted those trees 20 years ago, right? And so I like this idea of, if you're trying to get your customers' attention, and I say like, look at me. Now, I'm not a regular company or like a software company or, like a BDR, like, you might be listening. But I have a business and I need customers. And so the way I grow my business is I plant a lot of trees. So I've written 2 books. I create tons of content going back to the Salesforce days. I focus on adding a lot of value. I give away a lot of stuff for free, and so when I speak to customers, or even you and I were speaking here, right? Like, I'm not a stranger. You've been subscribed to my stuff, enjoying the value for some time. You have a sense for how I think already. And so when I speak to you, we're just like 2 old friends that, we kind of know each other, right? And so I say this, if you're trying to attract the attention of your customers, like start planting those trees, start adding value, even if it's something simple. And I was funny. I was using this example yesterday when I was talking to DocuSign. I said, imagine I went home today and I brought my wife 1 rose for no reason. And I said, honey, thank you. This is just for you for no reason. I would get so many more like husband points than I would if I gave her 3 dozen roses on Valentine's Day, right? Because it's expected. such as it is. And so it's the same thing. If you reach out to customers and you're adding value, like imagine I said, how about this? Go and have your list of your favorite customers or prospects that you haven't sold to yet. They haven't bought anything. And say, like, I'm going to share with them a piece of content that's not on my website. Maybe it's a Harvard business post or an entrepreneur post. And I sent it to you and I said, Adam, I know, last week or whatever, I know this is, we talked about this. That was really important to you. Or a lot of businesses like yours are struggling now with this. I came across this post in Harvard Business Review. It was about this. It reminded me of you. I thought you might enjoy it. That's it. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just making deposits. And organizations can do this too by creating valuable content. So, I get that sometimes we have to reach out cold, but like that's a tough slog. I would rather reach out to someone who at least has some awareness of what we do and the value that we add because we were so generous and we had the forethought to produce something that was actually helpful to them that wasn't about our product, So,
Yeah,
20
no,
years.
I think I've been thinking a lot about that marketing and thought leadership just to secure the position, but also give your team relevant stuff to share. We're just like, there's so much, hey, just following up. Are you ready to buy yet? Like you're just burning your customers when you could be, hey, saw this, thought of you,
Yeah. What about
nothing in
now?
return.
What
Yeah.
about now? And just the proximate. I'll tell you because I have a video about this on my YouTube channel. It was called the highest ROI event we ran at Salesforce. I'll give you and this is a good example. So I was a Salesforce customer 3 times. Okay, then I get acquired by Salesforce, and now I work there. And they said, hey, we want to run these customer events. I'm like, well, here's the thing with customer events at Salesforce. As a customer, everything to me felt like a thinly veiled product pitch. It's like, come learn about the future of AI, right? And now and now you're pitching me some AI stuff, So if you want to actually add value, you got to do that single rows for no reason. Invite them to an event, actually add value to your point about getting into the mind of the customer and thinking about what is important to them, delivering that, and asking for nothing in return. Just value add. So we started to run these events. I have a whole video on my YouTube channel about how we did this. So we started to run these events. I said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to fly to a bunch of cities and we're going to do dinners for our customers. Intimate, 10, 15, executives. Certain, we'll keep the profile consistent to make sure that it's valuable and they have colleagues to talk to. And I facilitated a discussion, quiet. We had dinner. It was lovely, but it wasn't like a mixer where it's like, okay, everyone's just talking to each other. We did that to kick it off. And we just had a quiet discussion about what their focus was in their business, the things that they're challenged with the most. Nothing and we said, don't talk. We don't want you to talk about Salesforce at these dinners. When we measured the ROI of these dinners, ROI measured as the amount of revenue generated within 90 days of the event, it was the highest ROI events that we did, more than Dreamforce. And why? Because we added so much value. We asked for nothing in return. And so when the reps started following up at the end of the month, end of the quarter, asking to get their deals done, the customers picked up the phone. That's the power of reciprocity and actually adding value. So yes, are there things you can do to shortcut and end of month, end of quarter? I get it. There are things you can do, but there's just no substitute for just adding legit value.
Yeah, a lot of our team members and advisors are out of Salesforce, so we definitely had a phase in our company where everything was an opportunity to pitch. You'd be on a third meeting and you're about to run this guy through the whole thing again. Your latest book is called The Sales Leader They Need. When you were doing your research, with salespeople about what makes leaders great, what did you find that inspired you to write this book?
Yeah. So it's funny, when I went out to sales leaders and I said, can you think of the best sales leader you ever had? And that person usually pops to mind very quickly. And then I said, okay, let me ask you this. What was it about this person that made them the best sales leader you ever had? I've run this exercise hundreds of times, and I go to the whiteboard and I write down everything they say. And then I look for patterns and I'm trying to, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean? The two themes that come up the most are, number one, they cared about me. Number two, they helped me grow. That's it. So they were honest, they were transparent, they pushed me, they believed in me, they coached me, they held me accountable, they did what they said they were going to do. All of these things. Now, it's interesting. So this is, this is what makes the greatest sales leaders. What hardly ever came back on that list was they taught me everything they knew about sales. Maybe they were a really great individual contributor salesperson who knew a lot about sales, but that was not what made them the best. And then when I asked these sales leaders, I said, so this best sales leader you ever had, how did you show up for this sales leader? Oh my gosh, I would run through a brick wall for Adam.
Mhm.
I tried really hard. I didn't want to disappoint Adam. I would put in the extra, what I refer to as discretionary effort. When I ask people on a scale of 1 to 10, Adam, how hard are you trying at work? 10 being you got your company tattoo on somewhere on your body, and 1 being you're about to, throw in your resignation. Like, where would you sit? Most people are not a 10 or even a 9, which means that you have more to give. And so these best sales leaders were able to unlock this discretionary effort from their team members, and it made all the difference. And so the question becomes, okay, great. You want to care about people and help them grow? Those are good sentiments. How do I do that? And so the book is about 5 specific skills that will help you become the kind of sales leader that your team would fight to work with again, the best they ever had, and will try super hard for just because it's you, and help you develop and deepen that relationship.
Yeah, I had a guest last year at some point named Liz Wiseman. She was at Oracle for a long time, and she wrote a book called Multipliers about how the best leaders are the ones that make those around them better. It's not the genius, but it's the genius maker. I want to talk a little bit about the 5 pillars: promoting transparency, protecting and advocating, driving accountability, coaching, and getting and giving feedback. When you think about the 5 pillars, is there one that stands out to you that maybe most people have an opportunity for improvement for?
Well, it's interesting because out of the 5 pillars, they're not equally easy to do. They're all easy to say. Some are harder to do than others. Some require more skill. I usually judge them, and they're actually the order that you say them in how they kind of appear in the book. They're cumulative. So, for example, to coach someone, coaching people involves holding them accountable and creating transparency and having their back and protecting them and so on. So I would say if I had to pick one, coaching, because it's the accumulation of a lot of these other skills.
Mm-hmm.
It's also just, I always go back to the data and the science. It's the number one thing that you can do to improve the performance of your team is coach them. And there's a lot of problems with coaching, which I get into in the book, but I would say that is the objectively speaking, the number one thing that sales leaders can do to improve the performance of their team is coach them.
Yeah. And is there something that people can do to increase or improve their posture when going to coach team members?
So, it's a nuanced conversation. So, we won't do it justice here. But one of the things when it comes down to coaching is if I'm going to coach Adam, the big question is, all right, what am I going to coach him on? It's like the what problem do you solve kind of question. So it's coaching is great to say, but what am I going to work with Adam on? And unless I have a system to diagnose, what it is that Adam can focus on to improve his performance the most, it's going to be very difficult for me to, because even if I'm good at coaching, and if I'm coaching on the wrong thing, then you're not going to see the value. So having a system to diagnose issues with your team and what you're going to work with them on is important.
You've written about sales execution. You've written about sales leadership. What's next for you in terms of topics you're going to explore?
Well, The Sales Leader You Need just came out in May. So
it's early.
I'm not running to run another book just yet. But and I don't know if you can tell me if you feel like this would be an interesting topic to explore. But I've noticed in writing a foundational book on sales execution book on science and empathy based selling tactics, Sell the Way By, and now The Sales Leader They Need. I've noticed that there are some common themes across both that also intersect with common themes that exist in life. So, being an entrepreneur and a salesperson and a father and a cancer survivor, there's a lot of experiences that, I feel intersect in life with the sales world. And so there's concepts like transparency or certainty, like these very human foundational concepts that we use when we handle objections, and we use when we coach our team, and we use when we date people or wait for the results of our medical test. There are some of these foundational human concepts that I found have kind of been a common thread across these various topics. So I thought, maybe one day it'll make sense to write a book that focuses on these things. But for now, there's actually quite a lot of room to grow and need on the foundational sales side, because as competent as we are in our sales execution, like I said right off the top, the system changes all the time. And so there's always a need to refine our tactics and approach depending on the situation we find ourselves in. So who knows, maybe there's something related to that. But I love this, sales. You mentioned off the top, even before maybe we started recording, that I seem the same when you're talking to me as I do when I'm on the videos and the content. This is just who I am, and I'm obviously passionate about this stuff. And I feel like this is like the next foundation of sales execution is just authenticity in a world where you have all of this content and AI, and it still comes down to two people interacting and just being human. And so when you look at all of these tactics and concepts and threads that permeate everything, that's the thing that just keeps coming back. I keep coming back to is just be like a human first and foremost, and that'll never lead you wrong.
Yeah, no, I think a lot about all these same things. The thing I've enjoyed about sales, startup, and leadership is that they're a rich classroom for what I call emotional spiritual growth.
Mm-hmm.
There are lessons that transcend the aspects and areas of our lives that allow us to bring more of our full self to all of them.
100%. Yeah, I love it. And look, if you're a customer, if you're a parent, a friend, all these experiences that we have in life, I think are doing a good job of preparing us for how to be good, at sales. Unfortunately,
just why we're really here.
Yeah. There's a lot of history and Cobra Kai tactics we have to undo along the way. But at the end of the day, just being
a lot of the emotional spiritual growth process is the unlearning. So it would make sense that would be the process in sales development as well. David, you've been really gracious with your time. What's the best way for guests to keep up with you and the work you're doing?
Yeah, so like I said, I give away lots of stuff for free. If you head over to cerebralselling.com, you'll find tons of tactics and content and videos. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. Tell me that you heard me on Tuesdays with Morrisey podcast, and say hi. And if you're up for some free training, I have a free training video which you're welcome to check out. It covers what I call the three big shifts that modern sellers need to make to be successful in this environment. So if you want to check that out, just go to cerebralselling.com/3-shifts, the number 3-shifts, and check it out.
Awesome. Well, we'll have links to Cerebral Selling and your LinkedIn in the show notes. Thanks again for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Adam.
Thank you for listening to Tuesdays with Morrisey. That conversation was with David Premer, founder of Cerebral Selling and the author of the books Sell the Way You Buy and The Sales Leader They Need. What I enjoyed about the episode was David's emphasis on being human, whether you're selling or leading teams. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with a friend, and we'll see you here soon. Thanks.